Captain Sarah Chen stared through the viewport of the salvage ship Opportunity at the massive structure floating in the void. The abandoned research station hung against the backdrop of an ancient red dwarf star, its curved segments reflecting dull crimson light. After 6 months of increasingly desperate salvage runs, this discovery might finally save her crew from bankruptcy. "What do you make of it, Morris?" she asked her chief engineer, who was scrutinizing the holographic readouts with a furrowed brow. "Never seen anything like it, Cap," Morris replied, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "Architecture doesn't match any known species in the database. Those curved segments, they're not just for show. They're designed to channel some kind of energy, but the readings don't make any sense." The station had appeared on their sensors 3 days ago, a phantom signal that shouldn't have existed in this uninhabited sector. The Opportunity's crew of 8 had voted unanimously to investigate, despite the risks. These days, they couldn't afford to pass up potential salvage. "Life support?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Their initial scans had shown minimal power signatures. Minimal. Environmental systems are running at about 2% capacity, just enough to maintain pressure in some sections. No signs of active habitation, but Morris trailed off, adjusting some settings on his console. But what? The power drain isn't consistent with an abandoned station. Something's still running in there. Something big. Sarah nodded slowly, considering their options. The smart play would be to document the location and sell the coordinates to one of the major salvage corporations. But the Opportunity's fuel reserves were running low, and corporate bureaucracy could take months. Her crew needed credits now. "Prep the boarding shuttles," she decided. "Full environmental gear. I want teams of 2, standard salvage protocol. Rodriguez, you're with Morris. Lai and Patil take shuttle 2. Jackson and Cooper, you're our eyes from the ship. Martinez, you're with me." As her crew moved to their positions with practiced efficiency, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The station's architecture was too deliberate, too precise to be random. Every curve and junction seemed to serve a purpose they couldn't yet understand. The journey to the station was tense but uneventful. Their shuttle docked with an airlock that, surprisingly, still had enough power to cycle. Sarah and Martinez stepped into a corridor that curved gently upward, their helmet lights creating pools of brightness in the gloom. "This place is pristine," Martinez whispered over the comm. "No dust, no debris. Are we sure it's abandoned?" Sarah was wondering the same thing. Most derelict stations showed signs of their abandonment. Scattered equipment, emergency barricades, something to indicate a hasty evacuation. This place looked like its inhabitants had simply stepped out for a moment. They made their way deeper into the station, following the curve of the corridor. The artificial gravity was still functioning, though at slightly lower than standard. Their boots made soft clicking sounds against the metallic floor, the material unlike anything Sarah had encountered in 15 years of salvage work. "Cap, you need to see this." Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm. "We found some kind of control room. Well, you should probably see for yourself." Following Rodriguez's nav marker, Sarah and Martinez found themselves in a circular chamber dominated by a holographic display that filled the center of the room. Morris was already there, his tools spread out as he examined a console. "It's still active," he said without looking up. "The whole station. It's not abandoned, it's waiting." The hologram showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, but not like any Sarah had seen before. Certain systems were connected by lines of light, forming a complex web of relationships she couldn't understand. And at the center of it all, a single point pulsed with a steady rhythm. "That's us," Morris said, pointing to a blinking dot at the edge of the display. "And that," he indicated the pulsing center, "is sending out some kind of signal. Has been for who knows how long, waiting for someone to find this place." Before Sarah could respond, a new light appeared on the display. A massive signature approaching their position at faster-than-light speeds. The station's systems began to hum with increasing power, and the hologram shifted to show a message in an unfamiliar script that somehow translated itself before their eyes. First contact protocol initiated. Thank you for activating the beacon. The archivists are returning. The floor beneath them vibrated as ancient systems awakened, and Sarah realized their simple salvage mission had just become something much more significant. They hadn't just found an abandoned station. They'd stumbled upon first contact with a species that had been waiting for someone clever enough to find them. As lights began to flicker on throughout the station, Sarah made a decision. All teams, fall back to the shuttles. We need tow. She was cut off by a sound that resonated through the station's hull, the distinctive signature of a ship dropping out of FTL flight. But when they rushed to the nearest viewport, what they saw wasn't the expected arrival of the mysterious archivists. Instead, a predatory-looking vessel of clearly hostile design had appeared, its weapons already charging. The station's automated systems blared a warning that translated itself just as the first message had. Warning: prohibited species detected. Defense systems offline. Requesting assistance. Sarah looked at her crew, seeing the same mix of fear and determination in their eyes that she felt. They had minutes, maybe seconds, to figure out how to defend an alien station they barely understood, using technology they'd never seen before. But if there was one thing humans were good at, it was improvising. "Morris," she said, her mind already racing through possibilities, "how quickly can you get those defense systems back online?" Her chief engineer grinned, already pulling tools from his belt. "Give me 10 minutes and some duct tape, Hap. You'd be amazed what you can fix with a little human ingenuity." 10 minutes might be optimistic, Morris muttered as he yanked open an access panel. The alien technology beneath hummed with dormant energy, crystalline pathways glowing with a faint blue light. "These systems are like nothing I've ever seen. It's not just mechanical or electrical. It's both, and neither." Sarah watched the hostile ship through the viewport as it circled the station like a predator sizing up its prey. "What do we have to work with?" "The good news is the station's reactor is still functional," Morris replied, his hands moving swiftly as he mapped out the unfamiliar systems. "Bad news is the weapons systems are completely isolated, some kind of security protocol." But he paused, a familiar glint in his eye that Sarah had learned to both trust and fear. "These power conduits running through the hull, they're the same design as the defense grid. If we can't access the weapons directly, we find another way to use that power." Sarah finished. She keyed her comm. "Rodriguez, what did you find in engineering?" "You're going to love this, Cap." Rodriguez's excited voice crackled back. "Remember those salvage cutters we picked up last month? The ones rated for capital ship hulls? The power interfaces here are practically identical. Different scale, but same basic principle." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. It was exactly the kind of impossible coincidence that seemed to follow humanity wherever they went. "How many do we have?" "4, but they were never meant to handle this much power. We try to hook them up to the station's reactor. They'll burn out in seconds. Seconds might be all we need." Sarah turned to Morris. "Can you regulate the power flow? Give us a controlled burst instead of a continuous beam." The engineer was already pulling up schematics on his tablet, overlaying the alien systems with their own technology. "Maybe. These crystals in the conduits, they're not just conducting energy, they're storing it. If we can sync the pulse with the station's natural power cycle." A warning klaxon cut through their discussion. The hostile ship had launched what looked like boarding pods, at least 6 of them, spreading out to target different sections of the station. "We've got company incoming," Sarah announced over the general comm. "All teams, fall back to central control. Martinez, grab those cutters from engineering. Lai, Patel, I need you to set up a defensive perimeter. Use the curve of the corridors to your advantage. These bastards want to take this station. Let's show them how humans fight in close quarters." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Morris and Rodriguez worked frantically to integrate their salvage equipment with the station's systems, while the rest of the crew fortified their position. Sarah studied the station's layout, noting how the curved corridors that had seemed so strange at first now provided perfect firing lanes and fallback positions. The first impact shook the station as a boarding pod latched onto the hull. Through the security feeds they'd managed to access, Sarah watched as armored figures cut through the airlock. They were tall, insectoid in appearance, moving with practiced precision that spoke of military training. First contact with two species in one day, Martins quipped, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. Lucky us. Power synchronization at 60%, Morris called out. But we've got a problem. The targeting systems are completely fried. Even if we get the cutters working, we'll be firing blind. Sarah looked at the holographic display still showing the galaxy map, then at the security feeds tracking the border's movements. An idea began to form, the kind of crazy, improvised solution that had kept humanity alive and thriving among the stars. We don't need targeting systems, she said. The station itself is the weapon. Those curved segments you noticed, they're not just for channeling energy. They're focusing elements. The whole station is basically one giant lens. Morris's eyes widened as he caught on. If we time the power burst right, use the station's architecture to focus and amplify it, we can turn their own boarding strategy against them. Sarah finished. Those pods they use to breach the hull. They're perfect conductors, creating a direct path back to their ship. A firefight erupted in one of the outer corridors as the first wave of boarders encountered Lai and Patel's defensive position. The security feeds showed the aliens recoiling in surprise as they met organized resistance instead of an empty station. Power synchronization at 85%, Morris reported. But we'll only get one shot at this. Push too much power through those cutters, and they'll explode. Too little, and we just paint a target on our backs. Sarah watched as more boarding pods attached to the hull, exactly as she'd hoped. The aliens were following standard military doctrine. Establish multiple breach points, divide the defender's attention. But they hadn't counted on defending against humans who specialized in turning junk into solutions. All teams, fall back to the inner corridors, she ordered. Morris, Rodriguez, get ready to throw the switch. Everyone else, brace for impact. We're about to find out if human crazy is really universal. The station hummed with building power as the salvage cutters interfaced with systems they were never designed to touch. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the hostile ship moving into position for what they probably thought would be a killing blow. She smiled. Sometimes the best human ingenuity wasn't about building something new. It was about finding new ways to use what you already had. Now, she commanded, and Morris activated the jury-rigged system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the station's crystalline conduits blazed with blinding light, energy coursing through pathways designed eons ago by the mysterious archivists. The salvage cutters screamed as they channeled more power than their builders had ever imagined possible, transforming the station's very architecture into a weapon. The result was both beautiful and terrifying. Each boarding pod became a conductor, carrying the focused energy burst back to the mothership through their own boarding cables. The hostile vessel's shields, calibrated to stop conventional weapons, offered no protection against this improvised attack. As the light faded and emergency systems struggled to compensate, Sarah watched the enemy ship drift powerless, its systems overloaded by their own boarding strategy turned against them. But there was no time to celebrate. Multiple FTL signatures were appearing on their sensors. The archivists had arrived, and Sarah had a feeling their makeshift modifications to the station were going to require some explaining. The archivist ships emerged from FTL in a display that made Sarah's breath catch. Their vessels were works of art, crystalline structures that seemed to flow through space itself, each one unique yet clearly part of a unified whole. They moved with impossible grace, surrounding the station in a protective formation that spoke of centuries of coordination. "Well," Martins whispered, I guess we know who built this place." The station's systems responded to their arrival, holographic displays springing to life with cascading symbols that translated themselves into human-readable text. But before Sarah could read them, a new voice echoed through the control room, not through their comms, but seemingly from the air itself. "Fascinating," it said, the universal translator struggling to convey layers of meaning in the simple word. "You have repurposed our beacon in ways we never imagined possible." A figure materialized in the center of the control room. The hologram showed a being that seemed to be made of living crystal and light, its form shifting slightly as if unable to settle on a single shape. More appeared around them, each unique but sharing the same otherworldly beauty. "I am First Archivist Meridian," the central figure announced. "You have activated our beacon and defended it using methods that—" It paused, head tilting in what might have been amusement, "are not in any of our records. We have many questions." "So do we," Sarah replied, standing straight but keeping her hands visible. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the salvage ship Opportunity. We found your station by accident, and those visitors weren't exactly friendly." The Nephara, Meridian's form, flickered with what might have been distaste. "They seek to claim all ancient technology as their own, destroying what they cannot understand. We have fought them for millennia. Yet you—" The archivist moved closer, examining the jury-rigged connections between their salvage equipment and the station's systems. "You took components never designed to interact, forced them to cooperate, and created something entirely new." "How?" Morris stepped forward, unable to contain his engineer's curiosity. "It wasn't that complicated, really. Your power conduits operate on principles similar to our salvage cutters. Just had to match the frequencies and let physics do the rest." "Similar principles." Another archivist moved forward, its form suggesting intense interest. "Our technology is based on crystalline matrices grown over centuries. Yours is." It examined their equipment, assembled from discrete components. "The principles should not be compatible." "That's humanity for you," Rodriguez chimed in. "We see something that might work. We try it. Sometimes it blows up in our faces, but sometimes—" She gestured to their improvised defense system. "We surprise ourselves." The archivists conferred among themselves in streams of light and sound that the translator couldn't process. Sarah used the moment to check on the rest of her crew. Lai and Patul were watching the disabled Nephara ship, while Jackson and Cooper maintained sensor watch from the Opportunity. No immediate threats, but she didn't like how exposed they were. "We have reached a consensus," Meridian announced. "Your species possesses an attribute we had not considered possible: the ability to create harmony from chaos, to find connections where none should exist. We would propose an exchange." "What kind of exchange?" Sarah asked cautiously. "Knowledge. We are archivists. We collect and preserve the technological achievements of all species. But we have grown, rigid in our methods. Your improvised solution to the Nephara attack demonstrates approaches we would never have considered. In exchange for sharing your perspectives, we offer access to our archives." Before Sarah could respond, the station's alerts blared again. Multiple FTL signatures were appearing, a lot of them. "The Nephara do not accept defeat easily," Meridian observed. "They will return with a fleet. Even with our ships, the outcome is uncertain. Unless—" The archivist turned to Sarah, its crystalline form pulsing with what might have been excitement. "Would you be willing to apply your unique perspectives to our defensive capabilities? The Nephara expect our traditional responses. They have never encountered human improvisation." Sarah looked at her crew, saw the same mix of terror and excitement in their eyes that she felt. They were salvage workers, not warriors. But they were also humans, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was taking existing pieces and creating something new. "Morris," she called out, "how do you feel about helping our new friends modify their weapon systems?" Her chief engineer was already examining the crystalline technology, with a gleam in his eye. Their entire ships are basically living computers, Cap. If we can interface our systems with theirs, maybe use the salvage cutters as a template." He trailed off, mind clearly racing with possibilities. "We should have about an hour before the Nephira fleet arrives in weapons range," Meridian offered. "Is that sufficient time to implement your modifications?" Sarah watched as her crew was already moving, establishing rapport with individual archivists, pointing out connections and possibilities that the ancient species had never considered. Humans and living crystals working side by side, bridging a technological gap of millennia with duct tape, salvaged equipment, and sheer audacity. "An hour," she smiled. "You'd be amazed what humans can do with a deadline and some spare parts." As the station hummed with renewed purpose, Sarah realized they might have just stumbled onto something far more valuable than salvage. They had found a chance to show the galaxy what humanity did best, turning limitations into advantages, finding connections where none should exist, and proving that sometimes the best solutions came from the most unlikely combinations. The next hour was organized chaos at its finest. The station's central control room had transformed into a workshop where human ingenuity collided with ancient alien wisdom. Morris and Rodriguez worked alongside the archivists, their salvage equipment spread out across consoles designed for beings of pure energy and crystal. "The problem isn't power," Morris explained, gesturing at a holographic display of the station's systems. "It's coordination. Your ships are amazing, but they're designed to work as individual units. What if we could link them together, use the station as a focal point?" Meridian's crystalline form pulsed with interest. "Our vessels are already connected through quantum entanglement. We share information, coordinate movements." "But you don't share power," Rodriguez interrupted, her hands deep in a crystalline matrix. "Look at how your station channeled energy through those boarding pods. We could do the same thing on a larger scale, using your ship's natural crystalline structure as conductors." Sarah watched as understanding rippled through the archivists in waves of light and color. These beings had spent millennia perfecting their technology, yet they'd never considered using it the way humans instinctively did, by connecting seemingly unrelated pieces to create something greater than the sum of its parts. "Lai, what's our status on the Nephira fleet?" Sarah called out. 40 minutes until they're in range," Lai reported from her station, reading at least 15 capital ships, plus support vessels. "They're moving in attack formation. Looks like they're planning to surround the station." "Perfect," Sarah smiled, an expression that would have worried anyone who knew her well. "They're expecting a standard defensive formation. Time to show them something new." "Martinez, how are those modifications coming?" Martinez emerged from a service tunnel, his environment suit covered in crystal dust. "You're going to love this, Cap. We've got the salvage cutters interfaced with the station's power grid, but that's just the start. These crystalline conduits, they can be programmed. Change. It's like they're alive." One of the archivists, who had introduced themselves as resonants, moved forward. "They are alive, after a fashion. Our technology grows rather than being built. But your method of direct interface, of forcing changes through mechanical means, it should not work, yet it does. That's the thing about humans," Sarah said, watching her crew work. "We don't always know what's impossible, so we try anyway. Sometimes we fail spectacularly, but sometimes you create possibilities we never imagined," Meridian finished. "Your modifications are complete." "Almost." Morris emerged from behind a console, his tablet displaying a complex web of energy patterns. "We've linked your ship's power systems through the station. When the Nephira attack, they'll be firing at what they think are individual targets. Instead, we'll be one unified system." Resonance observed, its crystalline form vibrating with excitement. "The station will act as a lens, focusing and redirecting energy through our combined fleet. Brilliant in its simplicity." 20 minutes, Lai called out. "They're moving faster than expected." Sarah nodded. It was time. "All right, people, this is it." Morris, Rodriguez, get to your stations. Martinez, coordinate with the archivist ships. Remember, timing is everything. We only get one shot at surprising them. The next 15 minutes were a blur of final preparations. The station's systems had been transformed. Salvage equipment merged with ancient technology in ways that probably violated several laws of physics. But as Sarah watched the Nephira fleet approach on the tactical display, she felt a strange calm. They're launching fighters, Lai reported. Standard swarm tactics, trying to overwhelm our point defenses. Let them come, Sarah said, watching as the enemy fleet moved exactly where they wanted them. Meridian, are your ships in position? The first archivist's form pulsed with affirmation. All vessels synchronized. Though I must admit, never in our history have we attempted anything quite like this. First time for everything. Sarah grinned. Morris, power status. Crystal matrices are charged and synchronized. Salvage cutters are holding steady. Though I've got no idea how. By all rights, they should have melted by now. Sometimes the laws of physics take a day off, Rodriguez quipped, especially when humans are involved. The first wave of Nephira fighters reached their outer defense perimeter. Their weapons fire splashed against the station's shields. Shields that now pulsed with a crystalline energy pattern never seen before in the galaxy's history. Here they come, Sarah announced, watching the main Nephira fleet move into position. All hands, brace for impact. Let's show them what happens when human ingenuity meets archivist technology. The station hummed with power, salvaged equipment, and ancient crystals working in harmony as two species prepared to defend their impossible collaboration. Sarah looked around at her crew. Salvage workers turned impromptu warriors, and the archivists who had trusted in human creativity when logic said they shouldn't. As the first coordinated barrage from the Nephira fleet approached, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the best moments in history came not from careful planning, but from desperate improvisation and the willingness to try the impossible. All units, she commanded, execute Operation Patchwork. The station's crystalline heart began to pulse with energy, and the real battle was about to begin. The Nephira fleet's first volley struck like a hammer of light, but instead of impacting individually, the energy weapons connected with a defensive grid unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The station and the archivist ships glowed as one, their crystalline structures resonating in perfect harmony, enhanced by salvaged human technology that had no business working with such advanced systems. Energy absorption at 120% of projected capacity, Morris called out, his voice tight with concentration. The crystalline matrices are holding. Sarah watched as the impossible unfolded before her. The combined fleet wasn't just absorbing the Nephira attack, it was transforming it. Energy flowed through the improvised connections between ships, following paths laid out by human intuition and archivist precision. They're adjusting their attack pattern, Lai reported. Splitting into smaller groups, they've realized something's wrong. Too late, Sarah smiled. Morris, Rodriguez, initiate the feedback loop. The salvage cutters, those simple tools never meant for warfare, began to pulse with captured energy. The station's crystalline core resonated in response, creating a cascade effect that spread through the linked archivist vessels. What looked like chaos to the Nephira was actually a carefully orchestrated dance of power and possibility. By the first archive, Meridian's voice carried genuine awe. You've turned our entire defensive network into a single organism. The energy patterns, they're evolving in response to the attack. Sarah nodded. That's the beauty of it. Your technology adapts naturally over centuries. Ours adapts through necessity and improvisation. Put them together, and you create something that can evolve in real time. Resonance finished, its crystalline form vibrating with excitement. The Nephira fleet launched another coordinated assault, their weapons now focused on what they assumed were weak points in the defense. Instead, each blast of energy was caught, channeled, and redistributed through the network. The station's curved segments, once mysterious, now served as perfect conduits for power that should have torn them apart. "They're pulling back," Lai announced. Readings suggest multiple power failures across their fleet. The feedback is overloading their targeting systems. But Sarah saw something the others hadn't yet noticed. The Nephira commander was no fool. They were repositioning for something big. All hands braced for impact. They're going to try to overwhelm us with pure firepower. The enemy fleet's formation shifted, their ships linking up in a way that suggested they were pooling their remaining energy. The Nephira had realized they couldn't win through tactical superiority, so they were falling back on brute force. "Their reactor signatures are going critical," Morris warned. "They're going to dump everything they have into one shot." "Perfect," Sarah grinned. "That's exactly what we wanted them to do. Meridian, is your fleet ready?" The first archivist's form pulsed with affirmation. "Though I must admit, this plan of yours seems insane," Rodriguez suggested. "I was going to say beautifully human in its audacity." The Nephira attack came like a tide of pure energy, enough power to shatter a small moon. But instead of trying to block it, the combined human archivist defense opened itself to the onslaught. The station's crystalline matrices, augmented by salvage technology and human ingenuity, sang with power as they caught and channeled the massive energy wave. "Now," Sarah commanded. Morris and Rodriguez moved in perfect sync, their hands flying over controls that merged human and archivist interfaces. The station's core blazed with light as it took the Nephira's attack and turned it back on itself, not as a simple reflection, but as something new, something that had never existed before this moment. The energy rebounded through the linked archivist chips, each crystal vessel adding its own harmony to the symphony of power. When it reached the modified salvage cutters, the wave transformed one final time, becoming a focused beam of possibility made real. The Nephira fleet never had a chance. Their own energy, transformed by the marriage of two technological philosophies, overwhelmed their defenses. Ships began to drift, their power cores shut down by the precise application of what appeared to be pure chaos. "Enemy fleet is disabled," Lai reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "All systems showing complete shutdown. No casualties, but they won't be going anywhere for a while." A cheer went up from the human crew, quickly joined by pulses of light and crystal songs from the archivists. Sarah looked around the control room, seeing humans and energy beings working side by side, as if they'd been doing it for centuries instead of hours. "Captain Chen," Meridian approached, its form shifting with what Sarah had learned to recognize as joy. "You and your crew have shown us something we had forgotten in our millennia of existence, that true progress often comes not from perfect planning, but from the willingness to try the impossible." "That's kind of our specialty," Sarah smiled. "Though I have to admit, we usually just call it making do with what we have." Perhaps the first archivist's form sparkled with amusement. "That is why your species has achieved so much in so little time. You see limitations as challenges rather than barriers. We would very much like to continue this collaboration, if you're willing." Sarah looked at her crew, salvage workers who had just helped rewrite the rules of space combat, using little more than spare parts and determination. Then she looked at the station, where human and archivist technology had merged to create something entirely new. "I think," she said, "this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. Though we might want to stock up on duct tape." The station hummed with power and possibility as humanity's newest chapter began, not with careful planning or superior technology, but with the simple human gift of seeing connections where none existed before, and the courage to try the impossible.